The morning started like any other, except it didn't. I stumbled down the creaking stairs of the old house, the chill of early winter sneaking through the cracked windows. Sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains, casting long, trembling shadows across the dusty wooden floor. That's when I saw it. A folded piece of paper lying on the kitchen counter. My name was scrawled across it in a hand I had once trusted more than anyone else in the world. "Stay out of sight, freak." The words were blunt, cold, absolute. My hands shook as I picked it up, the paper brittle between my fingers. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my mind refusing to make sense of the cruel simplicity. A prank. Some twisted test of endurance. But no, the handwriting was unmistakable. It was my parents'. My stomach churned, while rising, and for a moment, I wanted to throw the note into the fireplace, burn it to ash, and pretend it had never existed. But I couldn't. The words had sunk in, heavy and permanent, leaving behind a hollow ache that no apology could fill. Freak. That word had haunted me my entire life, whispered by classmates at school, muttered by neighbors when I walked past, but I had never expected it to come from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, my mind racing. What had I done to deserve this? Was it my fault that I never fit their mold of normal? Was it my fault I had spent years hiding in the corners of the world, trying to stay out of sight even before they told me to? Hours passed in silence, broken only by the creaking of the old house and the distant hum of traffic outside. The note burned in my mind, each word a spark feeding the fire of confusion and hurt. I couldn't eat, couldn't move, and when I finally forced myself to look around, it was like seeing the house for the first time. Everything felt alien, every picture on the wall, every trinket on the shelf, even the smell of old wood and lavender that had once been comforting now felt like a trap. I didn't know it yet, but my life was about to shift in ways I couldn't imagine. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, there was a sharp knock at the door. My heart jumped into my throat, and I froze, unsure whether to run or to answer. It was the kind of knock that demanded attention, firm and unrelenting. I opened the door to find a man I didn't recognize, dressed in a sharp gray suit that seemed to absorb the fading light. He held a leather briefcase in one hand, and his eyes were serious, almost calculating. "Are you the child of Samuel and Margaret Wren?" he asked, his voice steady, professional. I nodded, unable to speak. The note was still clutched in my hand, trembling like a lifeline I wasn't ready to let go. "I'm a lawyer," he continued. "I have some important matters to discuss regarding your parents' estate." Something inside me tightened, a mixture of dread and disbelief. Estate, parents, my stomach lurched. They hadn't even left a goodbye beyond that note. What could possibly justify this? He handed me a folder. The papers inside were formal, official, and terrifying in their implications. My parents, my so-called parents, had cut me out entirely. Not just emotionally, but legally. They had left instructions that I was to be excluded from their lives, from their home, from anything they considered theirs. And yet somehow, through the strange twists of inheritance law, there were still secrets, hidden accounts, unopened letters, things they had tried to keep buried from me. As I stood there, the weight of their betrayal settled like a stone in my chest. My own parents had not just abandoned me. They had weaponized their love, turning it into something cold, sharp, and unyielding. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to vanish into the shadows like they had told me to, but something else stirred within me. Beneath the shock, beneath the despair, a faint ember of anger glimmered. They thought I would cower. They thought I would disappear. They thought I would let them dictate my worth. They were wrong. I closed the door slowly, the lawyer's shadow stretching long across the floor. My parents' note burned in my mind again. "Stay out of sight, freak." But I wasn't going to hide, not anymore. Not when I had questions, not when I had secrets to uncover, not when I had a life that had been stolen from me. Somehow, I would make them pay not with violence, but with the quiet, unyielding power of a life reclaimed. The first step had already begun. The house felt empty, though it had always been this way. The silence was louder now, echoing in the corners where memories lurked. I wandered from room to room, staring at the remnants of a family that never truly existed. Every photograph seemed to mock me, smiling faces frozen in time, hiding the contempt that had always simmered beneath the surface. My parents' smiles had never reached their eyes, and now I understood why. I began searching. Drawers, closets, the attic, a place I had only visited once as a child, and immediately fled because it smelled of dust and secrets. And there it was, a small, leather-bound journal tucked behind a row of old books, my mother's handwriting scrawled across the first page. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to burn it, to rid myself of any connection to the people who had branded me a freak. But the other part, a sharper, hungrier part, urged me to read. Page after page revealed a tapestry of deceit. My parents had resented me for years, yes, but it wasn't just personal. Their bitterness had roots in fear, jealousy, and obsession. My mother wrote about how my father had always wanted a perfect child, one who could carry on the family name without complication. And me, I was an anomaly, a mistake, a reminder of failure. I read about conversations I wasn't supposed to know, about discussions of money, inheritance, and controlling every aspect of my life. My parents had meticulously plotted my exclusion, framing it as concern, as love, when in reality it was something much darker. I closed the journal, shaking. Rage bubbled beneath the surface, tasting sweet and bitter all at once. They had destroyed my childhood, my sense of safety, my very identity, and then I found the letters addressed to no one but meant for me. They were drafts never sent, full of harsh criticisms and cruel advice, how to behave, how to hide my quirks, how to be invisible. My parents had spent years grooming me to disappear, to blend into the shadows, all while pretending to care. A strange mixture of sorrow and fury twisted inside me. For the first time, I felt the full weight of betrayal, not just the abandonment after the note, but the lifetime of subtle sabotage. Every kind word had been a lie, every hug, a calculation, every expectation, a trap. I needed someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't judge me for my anger, who wouldn't call me the freak they had decided I was. That's when I remembered my aunt's cousin, distant and long forgotten, who had once mentioned that not all families shared the Wren obsession with perfection. A phone call later, and I found myself sitting across from someone who actually saw me not as a mistake, not as a problem, but as a person. "You've been hurt," they said, their eyes gentle but firm. "But don't let them win. Channel this. Learn the truth, understand it, and then use it. Use it." The word resonated in my chest, echoing through the hollowed halls of my past. For the first time, I realized that my parents' betrayal could become something else, something I could wield. Anger, yes, but also strategy, focus, and ultimately power. Over the next days, I returned to the journal and letters repeatedly, piecing together hidden accounts, secret correspondences, and clues they had left behind. They had underestimated me, assuming that their freak would retreat, disappear, fade into nothing. But I was not fading, I was rising. I thought of the note again, "Stay out of sight, freak." I traced the words with my finger, imagining them burned into paper, into memory, into the very air I breathed. And I smiled, not the empty, lonely smile I had worn for years, but a small, dangerous one, the kind that carries both pain and resolve. The world outside went about its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the storm brewing in this old house. But inside, I had begun to change. The broken child they had left behind was no longer content with sorrow. Every cruel word, every calculated slight, every whispered humiliation had become fuel. And soon, very soon, the people who had spent a lifetime underestimating me would learn a truth they could not ignore. The freak they despised was not broken. The freak was awake. By the time I closed the journal, night had fallen. Shadows stretched across the walls like elongated fingers, reaching out as if to touch the anger coiling within me. I felt a surge of purpose, a promise I whispered to the empty house. "They will pay," I said aloud, and the words felt heavy, sacred. Not just for vengeance, but for justice, for acknowledgement, for a life stolen and reclaimed, and in that moment, I realized that my journey had begun. The path was dark and the stakes were high, but it was mine. Every step forward would be a reminder to them, and to the world, that no betrayal, no cruelty, no act of calculated abandonment could destroy me. I was ready. The first step was the hardest, not because it required strength or skill, but because it demanded patience, something my parents had never taught me. They had thrived on instant gratification, on control, on the illusion that their whims dictated the world. But I had learned to wait, to observe, to calculate. Every letter, every journal entry, every hidden account became a tool, a piece of the intricate puzzle that was my revenge. I started small, a whispered rumor here, a subtle exposure there. I had discovered that my parents had invested heavily in a charitable foundation, one they boasted about publicly but secretly controlled with an iron fist. Donations were tied to influence, appearances mattered more than impact, and their prestige was a fragile veneer. It didn't take long to see the cracks. I sent carefully worded letters to key benefactors, anonymous but verifiable, highlighting mismanagement and ethical discrepancies. I leaked information about their lavish spending while claiming poverty as a guise. The public trusted the Wren name, but trust is a fragile thing, easily broken by the scent of hypocrisy. Slowly, the foundation's reputation began to crumble. At the same time, I turned my attention to the estate. My parents had hidden assets under layers of legal complexity, thinking I lacked the knowledge or access to unravel them. I hired experts, lawyers, accountants, even a private investigator, and fed them nothing but the truth. Their plans, meticulously designed to exclude me, became the roadmap for my ascent. Every secret account discovered, every legal loophole exploited, was a reminder that I was no longer the invisible child. But revenge, I learned, was not merely about taking what they had tried to deny me. It was about exposing them, showing the world the face behind the smiles and polite greetings. I published documents, testimonies, and photographs in carefully controlled leaks. Anonymous enough to protect myself, but pointed enough to leave them exposed. Social circles whispered. Old friends questioned loyalties. Colleagues distanced themselves. The Wren Empire, built on fear, pride, and carefully curated appearances, started to rot from the inside. Through it all, I felt an odd mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. The anger that had burned in Chapter 2 was still there, but now it was tempered by strategy and focus. I was no longer lashing out blindly. I was creating consequences that matched the cruelty I had endured. Each move was precise, a calculated message to the parents who had thought they could destroy me. Yet, there were moments when the loneliness threatened to overwhelm me. Victory felt hollow when it had no one to share it with. My mentor, my distant relative who had guided me, warned me repeatedly, "Don't let this consume you. Revenge without restraint turns you into them." I listened, nodded, and carried on, but the warning lingered in my mind. There was a fine line between justice and obsession, and I was treading it carefully, aware of the danger but unwilling to retreat. One evening, after weeks of careful maneuvers, I found myself standing outside the Wren estate, the grand house looming like a monument to past cruelty. They were there, oblivious to the storm that had begun inside the world they had controlled so tightly. A sense of triumph surged in my chest. I didn't need to confront them directly. My work had done that. Their reputation was fraying, their control slipping, the very foundation of their lives. The image of perfection they had curated was cracking. I smiled, a dangerous, quiet smile, not a smile of gloating, but of understanding. Revenge was not instantaneous. It was a slow burn, a methodical unraveling. And I was patient. I had been trained in shadows, whispered lies, and the art of invisibility. Now I wielded those lessons with precision. As night fell, I walked away from the estate, feeling the cold wind against my face. The streets were quiet, indifferent, unaware that a reckoning had begun. Inside me, the embers of anger burned steadily, no longer chaotic but focused, controlled, ready to ignite again if needed. They had underestimated me, as they always had. But now, every step I took, every quiet maneuver, every revealed secret was a reminder. The freak they had despised, the child they had abandoned, was no longer powerless. And they would pay not with violence, but with the slow, unrelenting justice of a life reclaimed, a reputation dismantled, and the quiet, devastating power of someone who had been hurt too deeply to ever be broken again. The world felt different now, though nothing had changed. Streets, buildings, even the weather remained indifferent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Everything had shifted beneath the surface. My parents' carefully constructed lives had begun to unravel, their influence slipping like sand through grasping fingers. And I, the freak they had despised, was no longer invisible. I sat in the quiet of my own apartment, the remnants of the journal, letters, and legal files spread across the table before me. The air smelled faintly of paper and ink, the scent strangely comforting. I traced the edges of the documents with my fingers, remembering the hours spent piecing them together, the late nights filled with anger and calculation. Each page told a story, not just of betrayal, but of resilience, of a life that had survived the cruelty of those who were supposed to nurture it. For a long time, I simply stared, allowing myself to feel the strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. Revenge had been sweet, yes, but it had come at a cost. Isolation had deepened, nights had grown longer, and in the quiet moments, I wondered if I had become something I never intended. A shadow of the anger I once felt, tempered only slightly by strategy. Still, I could not deny the truth. I had reclaimed something vital. My identity, my autonomy, my very existence had been affirmed in the most subtle yet profound ways. The world now knew, or would soon know, that the Wren name did not define me. My parents' attempts to erase me had failed spectacularly. There were days when I walked past their estate, watching the quiet panic in the staff, the whispers that reached the gates, the subtle collapse of the social facades they had worked so hard to maintain, and every time I did, I felt the tension in my chest ease slightly. It was a vindication, but not the end. Life had changed, yes, but I had changed too. I thought about the word they had tattooed into my memory, freak. For years, it had been a chain, binding me to their definitions, their expectations, their scorn. But now, I realized it had lost its power. I had transformed that pain into fuel, shaping it into a force that had reshaped reality itself. The term still lingered, but it no longer inflicted damage. Instead, it reminded me of what I had endured, and more importantly, what I had overcome. Even so, there were nights when the loneliness pressed down like a physical weight. Victory was hollow without someone to share it with, and I had few who truly understood the journey I had undertaken. My mentor had left me with words that echoed endlessly. Do not let revenge become your life. Use it as a tool, nothing more. I tried to heed that advice, but the temptation to let it consume me remained, always at the edges of thought. And yet there was also hope. I began to envision a life not defined by the cruelty of others, but by my own choices, my own passions. I enrolled in classes I had once been told were impractical, pursued creative projects I had been discouraged from attempting, and slowly, tentatively, allowed myself to imagine a future not dictated by the Wren legacy. Sometimes I revisited the note, the words still sharp, still cruel. Stay out of sight, freak. I smiled then, not with bitterness, but with recognition. The words were theirs, meant to wound, meant to dictate, but I had reclaimed them in my mind, transformed them into a symbol of survival, endurance, and cunning. I had stepped out of the shadows, fully, deliberately, and on my own terms. The sun filtered through the blinds that morning, casting stripes of light across my table. I traced my fingers across the papers once more, feeling the weight of history, of betrayal, and of triumph. It was over, at least in one sense. The world had been corrected in subtle, irreversible ways. The cost had been high, but the lesson was indelible. Pain could be transformed into power, and betrayal could be turned into clarity. I stood, looking out the window at the city, alive and indifferent to everything that had happened. For the first time in years, I felt untethered, not lost, but free. The past would always linger, like shadows in the corners of memory, but it no longer dictated my present. I had been broken, yes, but broken in ways that made me stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. And though the Wren name still carried echoes of cruelty, I carried something else, a quiet, unassailable victory, the knowledge that no one, not even the people who had birthed me, could ever define who I truly was again. I closed the blinds and let the room fill with light. The freak they had tried to erase had survived. The freak had thrived. The freak was finally free.